There are a few seats, whoops, feedback. There are a few seats over here, if you'd like to come, Shelley, to get a seat. I want to welcome you all. I gotta say, after so many years, was it years we didn't do events? 32 years we didn't do events? It's so exhilarating to have chairs filled with people and just smiling faces, and I just want to welcome you all. Thank you all so much for coming. This is a pretty exciting evening, and we have maybe a special guest to introduce our guest speaker, Ron Kellett, UBC Sala.
Close your ears. That doesn't fit. All right. Well, I won't take more than a professional help. Thank you so much. So, thank you, Nancy. So, I am Ron Kellett. I'm director of the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at UBC. And welcome to this evening's presentation and conversation with architectural writer, cultural journalist, editor, critic, and close friend of Sala, Adele Weder. So Sala has, for a long time, deeply held values of community, justice, integrity, collaboration, ecology, and the service of design for people. In that spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth that accompanies those values, we acknowledge that we live, work, and learn as uninvited guests on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And we commit toward working towards reconciliation of the past and a future founded on those shared values. And a sincere thank you at the same time to our gracious and generous hosts, Nancy, Niels, and the staff at Inform. We are deeply appreciative of these opportunities to come together, to think, to learn, to talk about design with our friends, colleagues, and the public through Inform support. So thank you so much for that. So some upcoming events in our Sala's program. So next up, on Monday the 3rd of October, is a presentation, conversation, and a reception with the 2022 Margulies Design for Living Prize winner, Jane Wolfe, in the Robert E. Lee Alumni Center at 6 p.m. on UBC campus. And then 2 days later, we come back to Inform to the launch of my Sala colleague Daniel Rohr's book, Multisensory Landscape Design, on Wednesday, October 5th, reception at 5 and presentation at 6. And then 3 weeks later, on Friday, October 28th, is the annual garden design lecture with Swiss landscape architects Atelier Thom at 6 p.m. at Robson Square. And then finally, the following week on Wednesday, November 2nd, we return to Inform for the launch of my Sala colleagues Sharon McKay and Annalisa Nagum's book, Design Capital, The Hidden Value of Design and Infrastructure, on Wednesday, October 5th. Again, reception at 5, presentation at 6. So for further information on these and many other Sala events, please see our website and subscribe to our e-blast newsletter and our social media feeds. But this evening is for Adele and the launch of her very new book, published just last week, Thom, Architect, The Life of a Creative Modernist. In the words of her own word, a definitive biography of an iconic Canadian architect and social portrait of the mid-century design world in which he lived and worked. A compelling, complicated, and deeply researched story that Adele will share with us momentarily. We at Sala have shared and enjoyed a long and rich engagement with Adele, and we know firsthand of her passion and commitment for mid-century West Coast modernism. Adele, in addition to her degrees in arts and journalism, is a 2005 graduate of our Research Masters of Advanced Studies in Architecture program, where she studied with Sharon McKay and Chris McDonald. And her thesis project, Reconsidering the Binning House, had within it and revealed her distinctive synthesis of a journalist's zeal for story, a historian's commitment to research, original research, and a curator's eye for the special. And then a kind of a special sauce that I might imprecisely call the mind of a maverick, and a critic. And so attributes that I think have come to distinguish much of her work. More recently, Adele has shared these same skills with us on the selection committee for that Margulies designed for Living Prize, and she currently sits on SAL's External Advisory Council. Her extensive body of written work has been published in newspapers, design journals, and anthologies across North America. She's been an editor of Canadian Architect and a recipient of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada President's Award for Architectural Journalism. And I promised her I wouldn't talk too long about her. I'm going to get out of the way, and as promised, that's as brief as I make it, so Adele.
Thanks so much, Ron. And I also want to echo my thanks to Nancy Mills for providing this wonderful venue. And I want to thank the BC Arts Council for helping me with some funding for the last few months of research. And I want to thank like 200 people, many of whom you'll find in the acknowledgements of the book. It was an extraordinary amount of time spent talking with people who gave their time to me to provide this very detailed story, and that's why it took me 10 years. So sorry it took so long, and some of the people we've actually have passed away since, and it makes me feel even worse for taking so long. I'm delighted though that several people that were fundamental to this book actually are in this audience. The publishers from Greystone, the beautiful design of the book is by Jess Sullivan, who's in the audience, and my editor, James Pinko, and Jen Kroll, the managing editor. You can raise your hand if, I don't know where you are, but, from Ron's own collegial days, we have two key architects, Stephen Quigley and Paul Merritt, who are in the audience, and I'm really happy to see them, and maybe they might have a few words in the Q&A afterwards. But tonight, it's a pretty compact presentation. I understand we just have about half an hour, and I don't want to get too pedantic, just read the book. It's got all the details. I just want to sort of begin with an apologia of sorts, just why even write about the life of an architect. Most architecture books are just monographs. They show the building, this inert object, really, without people usually, and they describe almost like doing an autopsy, but architecture is a performance art. It's activated by people, and the performance, as architects all know, it starts long before the building is completed, and in fact, it starts long before, in my view, a person even becomes an architect. I truly believe it does start in their childhood, and that's what I set aside to find out what in this person's life led to making these incredible buildings. And through the research, there's some things, just going to go through some of his greatest hits, the Copp House, North Shore, the Plywood Research Center, Carmichael House, Forest House. This is just a little chapel. Sorry, that's my lousy phone pic from Half Moon Bay, a little chapel. You can go and see it yourself. I just love it. Like, even if they're the tiniest projects, and this is like, 400 square feet or something, he just makes them so beautiful. Massey College, of course, one of his landmark projects, the dining hall, Trent University's ceiling, the student dining room. So this is basically what I set out to find out. And so where did it all begin? Well, professionally speaking, I think it all began at art school, where he never went to architecture school. He was trained at what was then called the Vancouver School of Art, and this is what it looked like when he went there. And these are the people who started it. This is when, around the time he was born. He was 2 years old in 1925 when the art school started. That's Charles Scott, the second from the left, who basically is key to starting the whole Vancouver culture. He basically spearheaded the drive for an art school that's now Emily Carr University of Art and Design, and also concurrently the society that started the Vancouver Art Gallery. And he lobbied for it, and he gathered people for it, and And that really provided the fermentation conditions to create artists and architects. And then, so this is about the time, this is 1924, when Ron was a baby, and I said, okay, what was his family? I talked to all his colleagues, and he always talked about his mother. His mother is one of the first female lawyers in Canada, and she never went to law school. And I said, that's interesting. He's got this pioneering mother who apprenticed in a profession and was a trailblazer. And nothing about his father except sort of benign neglect, but that was hardly uncommon. But I thought, this is one of the few pictures of Ron with his father, and I thought, well, that does tell me something, like it's and this is Ron's family, and that's his mother, Elena, on the lower right, who was, like Arthur Erickson's mother, highly cultured, culturally ambitious, and really tried to nurture her son in a cultured world. And I thought, that's interesting, the similarity, the two masters of West Coast modernism. I got to give a shout out to Mavis on the standing next to Ron, his sister, who saved copious notes and lectures about the Thom clan, telling me about his grandparents and great-grandparents coming from Scotland. I found out that they were all craftsmen. They're all like woodworkers and stonemasons, and I thought, that's interesting too, and his father, the only reason his father wasn't was because Ron's grandfather, his father's father, contracted silicosis and died young, so his widow plucked him out of stonemasonry apprenticeship and said, you're going to just work in an office, you're not going to do that dirty work that's killed your father. And so I'm saying, okay, so that's all these things. So his mother trained him to be a concert pianist, and he practiced literally 5 hours a day. He won provincial competitions, like outside of his age group, and he was groomed and prepared to be a concert pianist. And I even included some of his, thank you, Mavis, for saving all his piano report cards from, when he was 12, from the Royal Conservatory. I put these in the Ron Thom exhibition I did about 8 years ago, and I remember at least one UBC academic, not Ron, sneered at them being in the exhibition because they seemed so personal and irrelevant to architecture. But I thought, well, like Goethe said, architecture is frozen music. It informed his life, and most interestingly, when I actually read the comments from the judges, they said things like, it's a little fast, it's too languid to capture the old, not languid enough to capture the flavor of the old world music. And the other one was, my favorite was a little violent on the forte passages. And I thought, that's interesting. This is a drawing by Paul Merritt, by the way, Ron Thom's design for the Case House. And like one thing I noticed when I was going through all the archives, I went through about 10 or 12 archives across the country, but the most useful is the one in Calgary, the Canadian Architectural Archives. And so many, oops, I don't know how to get rid of that now. So many of them have pianos in the plan, even if, like, they won't have furniture, but he would draw in a piano, and he'd often have lights, directional lights indicating where sun from the window would come in, and to avoid hitting the piano or to illuminate the piano. And his architecture was planned around the piano. And I thought, that's interesting. And then I thought, I look at the Case House. This is, under construction. That was the plan. And I said, this is architecture that is a little violent on the forte passages. So this is Ron Thom at art school. This is a non-linear talk, by the way. I'm going back now to art school. He's drawing. His teachers are Jack Shadbolt and Bert Binning, and this is Bert Binning, who's designed his own house, and you could see how he inflected. It's very, very subtle, but his own house inflected with oblique angles, which, just like his art and just like his drawings, and I believe that influenced Ron deeply. And I found out too that Ron wrote the standard rebel anarchist treatise in the school journal saying we got to overthrow the bourgeois love for ornament and fusty neo-historicism and all that stuff. And he really thought, good for him, and he put paid to it, that architecture could change society and that we must move into a new era. And he rejected both the establishment architecture and the sort of sentimentalist architecture. And this, the other fun thing, a rewarding thing about doing this book, that's Chris's first wife. He met her at art school, and she was actually, from the art that I saw in reproductive documents, she loved art, and she was gearing to be, she could have been a decent artist, perhaps even a very great artist, I don't know. We won't ever know, because like typical women of the 40s and 50s, she married Ron at 20 and started having babies, and she was stuck, and they thought at that time the greatest place to be was to put all the women and children in the North Shore in suburbs, and while the men worked downtown, and she had to quit her art. She had no time for it. She was detached from her friends and colleagues in art school. And so this book is not just about, it's about the culture that made these buildings, and it's possible because people like Thom gave up their careers so that men like Ron Thom could make buildings. And so that I thought was worth talking about in showing in the book. And the other thing is that, wow, the city planners thought this is the way to do it, put the families up in the suburbs out of the way, and the man in the city, and society would be so happy, and there's all these documents about how great it was to grow up in the North Shore. And I talked to Chris, I heard she will never talk to anyone about Ron Thom, and they were surprised when I got to interview her. And that's because when I said, well, I don't want to talk about Ron Thom, I want to talk about you. And so I talked to Chris about Chris, and I learned a lot indirectly about Ron, but a lot about the society that nurtured the both of them. And it proved to be a fallacy, as we all know, that this segregation of uses and, isolating people in the suburbs. And this was interesting too, what Jack Shadbolt, he thought Ron would be one of the most important Canadian artists. He wanted Ron to be an artist, a visual artist. Bert wanted Ron to be an architect. And Bert introduced this. So Ron this is Chris a couple of years into their marriage. You could see her smile has changed. I don't know, I remember this French literature teacher once told me, he said, all brides are beautiful in their wedding day because they're happy. They don't know yet. So this is Ron, one of his early exhibitions in his group of artists that he worked with called the Coastal Group. And that was an exhibition at the Vancouver Art Gallery. And Chris was his model, and that was one of his paintings. Hardly any of them survived. And that's also around the time, this is about 1946-47, where he designed and built his own house. Doug Shadbolt designed a house for Molly and Bruno Bobeck, the artists, right beside it. And they're both gone, they were on Peters Road. But I love this picture. They're just looking so contemplative, and the house was never quite finished, and just in his element. This is Molly and Bruno. I just did the house next door. Not all of these images are in the book, but I just want to show them for the hell of it. And then at the same time, Ned Pratt on the right there, he was doing the manifesto. Ned was just great at deal making and talking to the big shots and making things happen, and he orchestrated everything that happened at Thompson Berwick Pratt, and he recruited Ron to be a drawer, a draftsman. And Ned's own house, you can see the difference between Ron and Ned's, Ned just wasn't an artist. He was a great architect, a great manager, a great visionary, and a super smart guy, but he wasn't an artist. So he designed his house, and it was like a manifesto. It was a shoebox, and you can tell what, this part is what Ron designed. These are industrial egg crates that he would take, and he would dip ink in certain ones to make this kind of almost pointillist, but this very artistic pattern. There's no formula for that. You just have to have an artist's eye. And so he got Ron to do incorporate this artistic aspect to his otherwise very super straightforward house. That's a close-up of it. I actually, thanks to Kat Staples, I have a little piece of it that she cut out when his son dismantled it. So you can just see close-up how the effect. And I look at, again, I'm saying this not linear, so that's what his artist's eye could compose. And then I jump forward. These are one of the early drawings from Massey College. And I said, well, you see the connection to an artist's eye. This is decades before CATIA software could create these kinds of shapes, that he was imagining these ovoid shapes. That's his first rendering, round one presentation of the Massey College dining hall. And then the other great influence was Richard Neutra. You can't have a lecture in Vancouver about mid-century modernism without mentioning the legendary Neutra talks, 3 of them in the late 40s and early 50s, courtesy of BC Vinning. So that is, that's Neutra there, Ron just like inhaling every word. That's John C. Parkin. If anyone can identify these other guys, I'd be grateful, but these are the only 3 people I can know for sure. That's at the Banff Center. This is this is what he designed concurrent with the Neutra lectures. And if you see how he embedded the cop house in the landscape, and you see the house, the tree growing out through the little courtyard there, it's so Neutra. So, and this is the Carmichael House plan, very Frank Lloyd Wright, this 30-60-90 grid, the hex grid. And then I saw it again in round one of Massey College, this drawing, and said he's employed the hex grid in the window as the mullions, like hex mullions. Like, what kind of imagination can do that? And then I have this A-B comparison of, on the left, Adele Brower substation, which Ned Pratt designed. Bert Vinning did the color scheme, but you can't really see it at all. And then on the right, BC Electric building, which Thom designed. Now, there's a big plot with credits, and Ned, and every time somebody publicly credits Ron with the design, Ned gets all angry, Wood, or his family does, and they write a letter. But the reality is, Ned was the architect of record. He managed it, he got the job, he was responsible for everything, he approved everything, and a lot of people worked on this building, but Thom was the head of the design team. He did all the elevations, he decided where it would curve, he decided where the finials would look like and what the crown would look like, and how it would meet the street. So he was the designer, Ned was the architect. Okay, case closed, don't sue me. I just love, this is Fred Herzog picture from the time period with the BC Electric period building in the background. It's not in the book, it's courtesy of Equinox Gallery, thank you. I just love it. I couldn't put it in the book because Jessica said it would just be it would compete. It's art on its own, so it's almost competing with Ron's architecture, but it just exemplifies the two worlds, because when the BC Electric building, it's still there on Nelson and Burrard, when it was built, that was really a watershed architectural monument which marked the transition into the modern world in this town, as more than any single structure, I would say. And then you see the old world right in front, and I just find it a remarkable photograph. And these are 4 characters of the era all at once. It's for handy. There's Selwyn Pullen, top left. I love that self-portrait of him. Ned Pratt, looking like something out of some PI show from and then Fred Hollingsworth below Ned, really sweet guy, great friend of Ron, and an artisan in his own right. And then Ron, bottom left, looking as he usually does in pictures. He looks kind of lugubrious, and he's usually in the shadows, but the shadows is like his work. He liked the shadows, and he liked to play with light, so I guess that's a pretty good way to photograph him. And then I could do a vanity shot that I wanted to put in the book, but the pictures were copyrighted and not good enough quality. This is one of the famous pictures of Caravaggio. And on the right is a light well in Trent University and Champlain College's Commons Room. I said, this is how Ron uses light, like an artist. He has these dark rooms with light streaming in a very romantic way, in a very painterly way. And then I just had a thought this morning because he got probably rightly castigated for the way he designed Trent and so much darkness, and you couldn't see your conference notes and you couldn't see your steno pad and you couldn't see all your textbooks, you couldn't read. And that's a really big practical problem. Then I thought, wait a sec, who uses paper these days? We're all on our gadgets, we're all on our backlit laptops and phones. It's great for the contemporary era. So there you go. And this, I love. I threw this in the book. I love this. Thank you, Dick Sai-Chu. He's still alive and well, living in Toronto. One of the first he's known Ron since 1954 when he started at Thompson Berwick Pratt. That's the guys on break. Barry Downs. Oh, I do want to mention, my heart's broken for two of the key informants of this book, Barry Downs and Jeff Massey. And we just lost Barry so recently, and he was not only the sweetest guy in the world, but he was huge help. He just provided so many memories, so many documents, so many recollections of how things worked in Thompson Berwick Pratt, and so did Jeff. And this is them in the TBP library, and in the background, very, very machine-like, very straightforward. But you can sense, you can just see Ned in the center there, how he just lords over everyone. And it was quite the machine. I actually visited it. The building's still there. Last I saw it was a Korean restaurant. Before that it was Blockbuster Video. And it's sort of like, that's the changing times. I was fortunate to slip in after Blockbuster went bankrupt and before the Korean restaurant moved in. So I actually saw all the spaces. That's not where the BC Electric was designed. They had to actually rent a new building, which was actually a brothel, and they had to repurpose it into an architect's office to design the BC Electric building. But you can read about that in the book. The interior of the plywood research center that we saw earlier, just going back again to the artistry in his art. Because basically the theme was what happens when an artist becomes an architect. And so I'm looking, I looked at this picture of the inside of the Forest House 1,000 times, and I said, geez, that sounds, it just looks familiar somehow. And I was trying to figure out, and I looked back at that picture we saw earlier, a seated figure. Sorry, I think I keep hitting something.
It's not yet, no.
And I said, this is such a strong connection, and you can call BS if you want on me, but I said, he does his architecture like he does his painting. There's very centrifugal, there's ordering lines that lead to the center of the composition, really dark cloisonné lines, if you like, and it's not literally looking like it, but conceptually he uses the same kind of approach to create a composition that's very tight and unified. And also the other thing that's painterly, if you look at the ceiling, it's a huge sloping ceiling and it's all hand plastered, so it's like brush strokes. And so not surprising, his architecture had a solo exhibition at the Vancouver Art Gallery. I believe it's the first ever architecture exhibition at the Vancouver Art Gallery. I put one of the first because we couldn't be 100% sure that there wasn't one that they forgot about or something. So this is in 1961. And then this is the Massey, this is one of the documents. It's so fun rooting through these shoeboxes in Calgary for the original letter that Ron received from Vincent Massey inviting him to design, to compete with 3 other architects to design Massey College. And this is in the book, but Massey Harris, all our architecture and culture is based on farm tools, basically. The 2 greatest benefactors at that time were the Massey family, which grew rich on Massey tractor and tools, and the Harris family, they joined to do Massey Harris. They were the largest farm tool and equipment manufacturer in the British Commonwealth, probably one of the largest in the world, probably the largest. So they're both phenomenally rich families. And so the Massey Foundation bankrolled the Massey Report, they bankrolled the Massey Medals for all the arts, which became the Canada Council of Governor General's work. They bankrolled artists and architects left, right, and center. And the Harris family, that spawned Lauren Harris, who bankrolled the Group of Seven. So these guys, farm tools, Canadian culture. This is just a sketch I love because it's color from the Massey competition. Round one, very Frank Lloyd Wright, pretty derivative, very painterly though. I put this, this isn't in the book, but this is what I saw is one of his first plan. He put in rooms for music practice, music performance, and music listening, if you can see it. A room just to listen to music. None of that was in the design brief. They didn't want that. So they said, well, that's, So I thought, that's interesting. So music, and he played music in private after he quit, all his life, but he never played for anyone else. It just came out somehow. This is him with Prince Philip, and Claude Bissell and Vincent Massey behind the Prince. Oh, I just love this. I mentioned this book, but I want to show you the actual letter I saw in the archives. It was Hart Massey complaining to him why he's billing him for long distance calls about the project. And he just writes across the letter, "Bastard!" So, thank you. This is Paul Merrick. So, circa 1972, when he starts to get really involved with Ron's work, coming to join him to design Trent University and a lot of other things that you'll read about in the book. And this is one of Paul's buildings at Trent. Sadly, not complete, is my understanding, and now overwritten, but it's the chemistry building, so you can see Paul's artistic eye. And Paul's Ferry on Bridge and Bata Library. I mean, architecture, as you know, is fluid, and there were several different designers that would come and go and contribute. And, my understanding is Paul is one of the key designers of the Bata Library in the back and the Ferry and Bridge in the front. These are watercolors that I believe are by Thom. They're in the archives, and they're just sort of. I included them, yes, he loved painting all his life, but it was interesting to me how he sees architecture, because even though he was all about architecture, Ron was obsessed about architecture, and he's an architect. But when he would depict architecture, and he did this all the time, he would put it way in the background, nestled in nature, and the nature would be predominant. That's Champlain College in the background, if you can imagine. That's how he thought architecture should be and be perceived, that it should be a continuum with nature and defer to it. And this is just my final word. This is it's a little bit schmucky, but this is the plaque on Massey College still. And I guess I put that at the end of the book, so just remember Thom, architect. And I hope we do, and I hope this book helps that to happen. So thanks for listening.
I can run around with the microphone, but can you yell? Do you have a question? Okay, well, I leave it to you. Yeah, man. Questions?
Hi, Bo.
Hi. Not a question. I was fortunate enough to be able to read your book already. And thank you. It's quite wonderful. It's very intimate. It's very detailed. It's one of the best records likely is the best record I've read so far on the whole West Coast scene and how it expanded. And it's a great read. It's as animated as this lecture just was, so thank you.
Thank you. might have a question for like Paul or Stephen or anyone that as well. I mean, if you're available to reply, because you know more about this than I do, at least some of this. Okay, well, Paul, maybe I'll ask you a question then, because you said you haven't had a chance yet to crack open the book, but from what you've heard, which is a little bit of a précis of some aspects of the book, what did you think? Is there anything that struck you as accurate or inaccurate or weird or tangential there?
Oh yeah, just come on. It's easy. Paul Merrick, everyone.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say, not even having cracked the book, that I'm so thrilled to be here at this point, that you have, after what seems like all the years you've been trying to get this story together.
Not seems like, has been.
I guess that's why it seems so. I probably, in a funny way, count myself perhaps the most fortunate person in the room here, because you're obviously all here because you know about Ron, or know of Ron, or have had experience with him, and so you've taken the trouble to come and hear the introduction to Adele's story. I was hugely more fortunate than that, entirely by accident. I just happened to grow up in the right place and be in the right place and cross paths with great good fortune and have the opportunity to be part of a kind of, I guess, the last half of Ron's life. It's intriguing to me to see snippets of the first half because, like the rest of us, I only know those through stories and photographs and those in-valley days, and I guess his life with Chris was just coming to its end about the time I crossed paths in his life, and so I didn't know her, but I certainly got to know all the children and the subsequent parts of the journey, and suffice it to say, it was a good one. I thought part of what I'm really delighted to see, if you'll not hear it as patronizing, but I'm delighted to see how young so many of you are, because I found myself wondering when you put your launch together, well, who's going to come, because we don't go on anymore. And there's a few old bums and but it really warms my heart to see so many of you have, for whatever reason, learned about Ron and his work, and he was absolutely more than anyone ever I've crossed anywhere else in my life's journey. An architect whose origins and foundation and thinking came from that world we generally describe as the artist world, not the architects. Architects are reputed to be a little bit more anal retentive, and they have to think about things that artists don't have to, and all of it. But Ron absolutely got it the right way around, perhaps in a way by his own good fortune. I was tickled to see you started your story with the art school, because one of the things I remember him telling me was not about the building or even about Bert Binning or the other significant mentors that he had, but about the staircase, that it had one front door, which all those photographs are taken on. It had one way of getting up and down and getting to everywhere, and so he said you couldn't be in that school without crossing paths with everyone. And if I may risk a snide remark, I had the great good fortune to go to UBC at first when it was in the huts, and then when it moved to Lacerre. And And then the process went through not one or two, but three directors, and so I went to half a dozen schools, all by being in the same place, and it was marvelous. But I remember at some point on some other endeavor talking with Ron, and which is when he brought up the fact that the art school had one entrance, and one of the problems with the stairs is it has two staircases. As you know, properly means of egress, but it means half the chances of crossing paths with someone else are eliminated just for that reason. And all kinds of stories. And the other one that I thought, I'll shut up now, but the most significant was the fact that pianos kept showing up in Ron's work. And sometimes these clients were pianists, but often they weren't. Some of them actually went off and took lessons, got a piano because Ron said they should have one. And of course, all the rest of the journey, there was a piano in his front room or sitting room or whatever, and it kept moving around with him. But in all the years that we shared, I never heard him play. And I don't know anyone else that did. I'm sure there are a few, there must be still a lot. But he as you said, he didn't play in public. He didn't play for anyone. He played for himself, apparently. But we never heard him. And he was obviously not mad at that. All I know, he was a pretty wonderful mentor and human being, and a person I'll love forever.
That's a hard act to follow, Trevor, but you can try.
Well, unlike my friend Paul, I've actually read the book, but every second chapter, because of the short deadline Adele gave me to write a blurb for the back cover. So I read every second chapter. And in this, I'm the student of Marshall McLuhan. When he read books for pleasure, he read every second page. When he read them for academic research, he read only the bibliography and the footnotes. So that's how you get through this maze. Adele, it's an astonishing accomplishment, and the detail and the narrative stories are absolutely amazing. 98% of what I know about Ron now comes from your book. But within all that detail of lives and time, I kept asking Adele to stand out and tell us about the architecture of what is the essence of his most important buildings. So now's your chance. Pick 3 Vancouver buildings, maybe not BC Electric or COP. 3 Vancouver buildings and why they matter, independent of the life or independent of the time. Why do they matter architecturally? And if you want to say something about their fate, you can say that too.
3 Thom buildings.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, without the BC Electric, which took years of his life, is mostly houses. There's some less important projects that are like the police station, West Van, and so forth. Sort of a wild card is the 2 a.m. specials, which were quasi-Thom. But what I liked about them, that's I described in the book how he actually worked with teams, and that's why a lot of the authorship is disputed. Like Doug Copeland's house, the Shtitkin residence, it's not signed. He calls it a Thom house. Is it? Well, it's almost certainly, I think, one of those houses where we'd have the draftsman work in teams, and he would go around and say, push this up, no, you got to bring this up a little, to push this away. And I think of that as a very, almost a kind of socialist architecture, because it was so collaborative, and because even though houses like the Forest House or the Cohen House, all these incredibly expensive, exotic, dramatic houses, that's not viable for everyday living, whereas the 2 a.m. specials were, and they're almost all beautiful houses, simple, with just beautiful proportions. And so I would call that a certain kind of masterpiece, called collective masterpiece. And my essence is of that is that he actually cared to use his artist's eye in an economic and practical way. You said 3? Okay, and I'll say the Forest House because of what I said in the lecture, if you were filling in there. So that's 2, and that was easy. The third, not the BC Electric, well, there's Pearson College, if I could go outside of Vancouver. I think that was interesting because it was a public building that should have had well, it wasn't actually public, it's a private school. It should have had a big budget, but Lester Pearson died young, and otherwise it would be a total global masterpiece, I think. So funding was hugely restricted because that's how you get funding, is you hobnob with the big donors, the big name. But what I found, why I would say the essence of his architecture is he used these elements of the hex grid that he would use in the case house and such in a way that did make sense for a large institutional project that should always have the budget and has not only the means but the necessity of not being a simple box. That it actually has, the Pearson College has huge goals of bringing students together and making them feel wonderful and inspired and harmonious and to forge connections. So you have to have an architecture that's not ordinary, that's not a square box where people get lost in corners. And so I think even though it was very much limited by budget and now deterioration, I would say it's a masterpiece for that reason. Okay, that's 3.
Thanks.
So, thank you, Adele. Fantastic. I can't wait to read the book. It is for sale upstairs and Adele will be signing. So, thank you all very much.
Adele, that was fabulous. Thanks, Michael, for saving me. I don't know what I did.
It wasn't you, it's my projector's on the fritz or something. You're fine. Great talk. Thank you.